Hold on, I just need more light. I have like a big poofy shadow over my notes. It's so good to see all of you guys that aren't home with sick children. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is also Keri, which is really confusing because I only know a few Keris, but here we are. You guys have probably heard me say before that I'm a nurse at Children's Hospital in their cardiovascular intensive care unit. And one of the things that I like about intensive care is that there aren't a lot of people acting like they're put together. When a child is sick, these parents are really raw. They're tired, they're scared, they're hurting, and they often feel helpless. They're going through some of the most painful moments of their lives on full display in front of strangers who are using big words and making all the decisions. And I much prefer to step into that situation than stand here and talk to you about Christian cliches. Because I basically despise them at a baseline for their superficial, toxic positivity. I have even been known to get frustrated at my husband, Stephen, for simply telling me it's going to be okay, because I've made it clear he cannot predict the future. And suggesting that he thinks it's going to be okay has actually no impact whatsoever on whether or not it will be okay. And while I'm confessing things, I also banned from my house the phrase, "to make a long story short," because when someone starts out with that, a short story rarely follows. And now my expectations are set up to be dashed. But Keri was talking last week about not centering ourselves in the story. So today I'll step back from my own discomfort so that we can talk about some almost true cliches. A cliche is defined as a trite, stereotyped expression that usually expresses a common thought or idea, but it's lost impact by overuse. Your dictionary.com actually says that the word cliche has French origins. When printing presses were used, the cast iron plate that reproduced the words or like images, that the plate was called a stereotype. And so the French printers, as in like the people who print, not the machine, they thought that the noise that the casting plate made sounded like cliche, which was like a clicking noise. So it actually became this like onomatopoeia word that printers used to describe the stereotype. And that's how it came to mean a word or phrase that's repeated often, which I found mildly interesting. Some cliches are a little weird, but they work, like read between the lines, or keep all the plates spinning, or time flies. Some don't really make sense, like raining cats and dogs, or in a nutshell. And some are not good ideas, like grab the bull by the horns. Some are maybe not true, like there's no such thing as a stupid question. Cliches are usually specific to a culture. So when someone is like eating a lot of a specific item, we might say they ate it like candy. But a few months ago at work, I was talking with a doctor who is originally from Venezuela, and she said they ate it like rice. So in the same way, we have cliches that are specific to our Christian culture. We're going to talk briefly through 4 of them, which is pretty much all I can handle. And as we do so, I want you to be thinking of those 2 questions that Keri posed last week. Who is at the center of this message? And how does it line up with God's truth? The first one we're going to look at is where God guides, God provides. Now, we could talk about whether God is guiding, and how to know if it's him, but that's not today's focus. So we're going to look at the story of Abraham. I'm going to skip around in these chapters of Genesis just to pull out the main points, because it tells us a lot about Abraham. In Genesis 12, verses 1 and 2 say, "Now the Lord said to Abram, 'Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation.'" And then down in verse 4, it says, "So Abram went as the Lord had told him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran." So a couple things to note. Since the Bible clearly tells us the Lord said to Abram, we can be confident that God is guiding him. And at this point, his name was Abram. God's going to change it to Abraham in 5 chapters, but it's the same guy. Skipping ahead to Genesis 21, Abraham's wife Sarah gives birth to a son named Isaac when she is 90 years old and Abraham is 100. This is 25 years after he left his family and all that he knew and followed the Lord. And it would be easy to simplify this story and say, God guided, God provided. But this story wasn't simple. It certainly wasn't an easy journey. Abraham spent 25 years in a different land than he grew up in, probably questioning if he was crazy for listening to a God that didn't seem to be showing up amidst their pain of not having a child for so many years. Where God guides, God provides might not always be untrue. It does oversimplify not only our lives, but also God himself. Because having clear guidance from God doesn't always ensure a straight path or a painless path. And that provision might not be what we expect or even recognize as a provision. Psalm 119, 105 says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." Spending time with the word, Jesus himself, and in the word, the scripture, is a lamp to our feet. It's not a floodlight. It often shows us the next step. We'll stick with this story of Abraham as we look at the next Christian cliche of when God closes a door, he opens a window. I'm not really sure what this means, and it leaves me with all sorts of questions, like, how do we know God closed the door? Or like, how closed is the door? Is it unlocked? Like, is it bolted? Can I open it later? Or is the window in the same room? Can I just go out the window? Are we supposed to stay inside and look out the window? Like, how high is the window? Is there a view? Is this one of those like fake windows like my grandma had in her basement where there were like curtains but like cinder block walls? I don't know if y'all had grandmas with those. Anyway. Okay, so Genesis 17, 15 through 16 says, and God, this is backing up to more the beginning of the story before Isaac was born. "And God said to Abraham, 'As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her.'" So God's promise to make Abram into a great nation was specifically promised to Abraham and Sarah. Now remember, Abram was 75 when he first heard the promise. And when he was 86 years old, he and Sarah started to think that, I don't know, maybe God was a little late on his promise, or maybe they just misunderstood. I mean, 11 years had gone by, And Genesis 18:11 confirms that Sarah had already gone through menopause. So they decided that Abraham should have a child with Sarah's servant Hagar. Now, Hagar wouldn't have had a choice in this, as she was their servant. And she had a son with Abraham named Ishmael, who was not the son of the promise, because the promise was between Abraham and Sarah. And as you might anticipate, this caused a lot of heartache and relational pain between Sarah and Hagar, and Sarah and Abraham and Ishmael, between everybody. I'm pretty sure that didn't turn out to be the open window they might have thought it would be. Because God doesn't actually promise us open doors or open windows or blue skies. Quite the contrary. In John 16:33, God tells us, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. This idea of closing doors and opening windows suggests that God is maneuvering things that put us at the center of the story, instead of God being at the center. This next cliche is painfully false to me, of God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Did Sarah think that she could handle 90 years of being childless and then actually start her motherhood journey as a 90-year-old? Did Mary think she could handle raising Jesus, God with us, as a baby, a toddler, a child, a teenager? What about people who are in war-torn countries? Or some of you who feel overwhelmed by the grief of losing someone that you love? Or some of you that have children with special needs or chronic health conditions? Or some of you who just feel overwhelmed by all the laundry and whining and making dinner again while dreading when all the illnesses going around might land in your home and change your plans. Most people I know don't feel strong enough to handle what is before them. They feel broken, helpless at times, sometimes hopeless even. Sometimes they wish it wasn't their story. They're usually not trying to be strong, just trying to take the next step in front of them, put one foot in front of the other. I want to read from Judges 6, which picks up where the Israelites have been oppressed by the Midianites for 7 years. I'm going to read Judges 6. This is 11 through 16. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. Don't miss there that he was hiding. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." And Gideon said to him, "Please, sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian." And the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do I not send you?" And he said to him, "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." And the Lord said to him, "But I will be with you." Now, Gideon started out this story scared and in hiding when God came to him. And his story goes on to show like God moving in power to deliver the Israelites, despite Gideon's recurring fears. All of this was definitely more than Gideon could handle. And God doesn't tell Gideon, I'll make you powerful. And he doesn't promise to take away Gideon's fears. In fact, Gideon's insecurities and fears are all on display throughout his story for the next several chapters. God says, I will be with you. And Gideon comes to know the God that he calls in verse 24, Jehovah Shalom, the Lord is peace. And Gideon's not the only one that God promises to be with. We see that in Moses' story when God asked Moses to deliver the Israelites. And Moses says that he can't and gives reasons why. And God says, I will be with you. And we see this in Joshua's story when he takes over for Moses. And God says, just like I was with Moses, I will be with you. And in Joshua 1:9, he says, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. God doesn't ever promise that we won't have more than we can handle, but he does promise his presence with us. He promises to meet us in those valleys and to lead us beside quiet waters and to restore our soul. And it's in those valleys that you might hear this last cliche, that everything happens for a reason. I'm not going to argue the validity of this one, but I will say that this phrase is not really offering hope, and it's not offering comfort either. It's a conversation stopper when someone feels like they don't want to go further into someone else's pain. It might make the person saying it feel better, but rarely the person that it's said to. In fact, all four of these Christian cliches are dismissive of pain. They attempt to simplify something that's complex, and they try to make sense of a God that isn't always asking us to explain him. When Stephen and I had been married a little over a year, we were helping lead an 8-week-long summer mission trip of high school students in Nepal. And there was one evening that our whole group was walking back to our hostel in the rain. It was like a 30-minute walk and lots of rain, lots of walking. When we finally got back to where we were staying, a student looked at me and told me that I had a huge blob of bird poop down one side of my face. Now, I remember feeling what I thought was a large drop of rain, which made sense in my mind because it was raining. And my thinking was almost true. It turns out bird poop feels a lot like rain, but it is not rain. And sometimes we need to look in the mirror and look to those who are wise around us to help us see the difference. Acts 17:10-11 says, as soon as it was night, the believers sent Paul and Silas away to Berea. On arriving there, they went to the Jewish synagogue. Now the Berean Jews were of more noble character than those in Thessalonica, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. This is Paul, who wrote a lot of our New Testament books. Yet these Bereans didn't just believe everything that they heard from Paul. They compared it to the scriptures to see if what they were hearing was true, which is what Keri's been talking about the past 2 weeks about not settling for a counterfeit. both collectively and individually, we need to examine the things that we're hearing and believing about God and see if that stands up to who God reveals himself to be. Tim Keller once said, "If your God never disagrees with you, you might be worshiping an idealized version of yourself." I want to read that again. If your God never disagrees with you, you might be worshiping an idealized version of yourself. If we worship a God that we've created, rather than worshiping who God reveals himself to be, then we become the creator. And if we are the creator, then that's idol worship. God doesn't show himself to be a God of cliches who holds our pain at arm's length and who simplifies and dismisses our pain and our struggles as trite. He leans all the way in. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15 and 16 says, "Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin." And this isn't just temptation to anger or jealousy or lust. This is temptation to compare, temptation to feel like we're alone, temptation to lose hope. Verse 16 says, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." We have a God who knows. He's God with us, full of mercy and grace. And he's not disappointed in our weakness. He's not mocking us for what we think feels overwhelming. He's not quoting ridiculous cliches that don't help. He offers his presence, and he's asking us to draw near to him because he loves us and cares for us deeply. I want to close out today by reading a prayer over you guys. This is from a book called To Light Their Way. It's a collection of prayers and liturgies for parents. And I want to read one over you that is entitled "A Prayer for the Overwhelmed," because I often feel that. So if you guys just want to sit and just let this wash over you, let the truth just wash over you today. Oh God, help us resist the lie that we are alone. In the swirl of parenting, in the world at large, for you hold our children, and indeed all of us, in the palm of your hand. Oh God, as we stay awake at night, wondering how we will make it through another week, wondering what our children's lives will look like in the future, give us peace and breathe empathy into us, for the need is all around us. Oh God, help us to focus on right now, even in our exhaustion, in our frustration, and in our loneliness. Help us be awake to you in the world, in the form of a crying baby in our arms, or a child in need of help with schoolwork, or a hungry neighbor on the corner. Oh God, we don't have to tell you that we live in a reality with so much need, both in our homes and in our broader communities. And it's easy to feel like whatever we do is just a pebble in the ocean. Oh God, remind us that you are present to each individual heart and every communal cry. Give us strength for the day and bright hope for tomorrow. Amen.